So good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second day of CISM Bootcamp. Today we would start with our chapter 2 or domain 2, that is more on information risk management. So yesterday we had reviewed domain 1, that was on information security governance, where we touch base on a lot of objectives, a lot of areas, and we know what is information security governance, how we should plan security governance, what are the roles and responsibilities, what are the constraints, what are the pitfalls, and something about risk. The brief overview about the risk management was also covered in chapter 1. However, chapter 2 is completely on information risk management, where we would be focusing more on the risk management process, how to do the risk assessment, what things need to be considered, how the risk management should be planned, and how it should be implemented within your organization. So information risk management, we talk about risk management from information security perspective. So we are not going to deep dive into the enterprise information security in enterprise risk management program. So because we are focusing more on information security, so the context of risk management in CISM is more from the security perspective. Manage information risk to an acceptable level based on risk appetite to meet organizational goals and objectives. This is the whole crux of domain 2, right? So it almost represents 30% of the CISM examination, as I told you yesterday as well, and approximately 45 questions. So it's a huge area that will cover the maximum portion of your CISM exam. These are some of the objectives that are mapped to domain 2. Understand the importance of risk management as a tool for meeting business needs and developing a security management program to support these needs. Now, as I told you earlier also in yesterday's session also, how the risk management is very important for every organization, right? How it will focus on how the risk needs to be identified and what stages how that needs to be identified, right? Understand ways to identify the risk, rank and respond to the risk. Rank means your ranking of the risk. It can be high, it can be medium, it can be low severity, right? So ranking also is also important to prioritize the risks and respond to the risk. That is your risk treatment plan. Assess the appropriateness and effectiveness of information security control. So once you have done the risk assessment, then you decide what to do with the risk that is unacceptable. Acceptable, obviously, if it is acceptable and within the risk appetite, you will not bother about it. You are more bothered about the risks that are unacceptable, right? Then reports on information security risk effectively. So once you have done the risk assessment, you will do the remoting, you will do the monitoring of the risk assessment that has been carried out. Anything that has impact to the business is called risk, right? What is exposure? The extent to the vulnerability is exposed. So for example, you have your facilities, right? Your area has a risk of getting the floods every year. Now you know the exposure factor. The exposure factor means if there is a flood in that area and your 1/3 of your building is impacted by flood, that means that 33% will be the exposure factor. Your 33% of the building is exposed to the vulnerability, right? Classifying assets is very important. We talked about classifying the assets yesterday also. Who will classify the assets? This is the responsibility of your asset owners to classify the assets according to their business value. Now, who will determine this business value? Obviously, we will not do it. Information security manager will not do it. This should be done by the asset owners. And what is the business value? When the business value is a combination of criticality to operations or sensitivity, right? Your business function, for which purpose the asset is being used, how much profit you are getting or how much business you are getting from the asset, what kind of information it has stored, right? What kind of information it processes, how it is mapped to your business objective. All these factors are used to are used to calculate the business value of any of the information assets. You know what are controls and countermeasures? Yesterday we talked a lot about controls and countermeasures, right? So for any of the risk that needs to be mitigated, you need to have controls in place, right? Countermeasures are reactive, controls are proactive. When we talk about the risk assessment, what information security manager should do, he should understand that risk management must operate at multiple levels. Multiple levels, it can be top level, medium level, lower level, management level, employee level. It should be at every level, right? The overall assessment of risk includes three distinct phases. It should be four. The risk identification, where you identify the risk. Now, how the risks are identified, we will talk more about it. Risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk response. So we will talk about all these phases in later slides. What is the importance of risk management? Now, this is a very good question, right? Normally, every organization has a risk management function. Some organization has a single function who has a risk management process at the enterprise level. They have separate teams who do the risk management or risk assessment for the enterprise function. They have different teams who will do it from the information security perspective. It depends upon the hierarchy or organization structure of all the organization. It will vary from organization to organization, right? So the management of risk to information resources is a fundamental function of information security, right? Because we are talking about information security here, so that is the reason it says it's the fundamental function of information security. The effectiveness of risk management depends on the degree to which it is a part of organization culture. Now, what is a culture? Culture means how people in your organization respond to risk, right? Are they lenient? Are they risk averse? Or they are risk aggressive? What does risk averse means? Risk averse means you want to invest in a share market. That is an aggressive route. That is not risk averse. Risk averse means you deposit your money in a bank where you will get the guaranteed amount of a guaranteed return. That is risk averse. You invest in the share market, which is very aggressive. You don't know whether there would be losses, where you don't know whether there would be profits. That is risk aggressive. It also depends upon the mission and objectives, right? The design and implementation of the risk management process in the organization will be influenced by culture, mission, and objectives, as I told you yesterday. Your organizational structure, your ability to absorb losses, that is your risk appetite. Products and services, if your organization is dealing with any kind of products or services, it can be any or both of them. Management and operation of processes, there can be management level processes, for example, how you monitor it, your budgeting, right? Your strategies, that would come under management processes. Operational processes would be technical processes that would come under the technology area. Specific organizational practices, example ISO 27001 or COBIT or CMMI, and physical, environmental, and regulatory conditions. So all these things has to be considered when you are designing or implementing the risk management process for your organization. Hope it is clear. So outcomes of risk management. Why you do why you have understand what is the importance of risk management. Now, what is the outcome of risk management? One of the outcomes of good governance is effective risk management. What is effective risk management? Now, this is very important. You will see a lot of questions where it talks about effectiveness. You might have seen in your organization, you do a lot of things for effectiveness, right? You audit the controls for effectiveness. You audit the processes for effectiveness. Why you do the audit, right? For effectiveness. Now here we are talking about risk management. One of the outcomes of good governance is effective risk management. Effective risk management means you are able to identify the risk in a timely manner and mitigate the same in the timely manner before the risk is actually materialized, right? If it has been done in a proper manner, you were able to mitigate the risk, there was no business impact because of any risk, then it is effective risk management processes in your organization. This includes appropriate measures to mitigate risk and reduce potential impacts on information resources to an acceptable level, and providing an understanding of organization threats and vulnerabilities. When you do the risk assessment, right, every risk assessment talks about acceptable level, right? There is no 100% security, there is acceptable level of risk. That means there will be some level of risk remains after completing the risk management assessment and implementing the controls that will come under your risk treatment. Still there would be some level of risk, that is your acceptable level. An acceptable level of risk is decided by your company's risk appetite, your risk capability, correct? Sorry. An understanding of organization threats and vulnerabilities. Once you have completed the risk management, your risk assessment process is completed, you will have an understanding what kind of threats your organization has, what kind of vulnerabilities your organization has, right? That will be documented. An understanding of risk exposure and potential consequences of compromise, right? I told you what is exposure. I told you what are the potential consequences or impact. So this is part of your risk analysis when you do the risk assessment. Awareness of risk management priorities based on potential consequences, right? On the basis of impact, you decide what is the prioritization of the risk that needs to be mitigated, right? An organization risk mitigation strategy sufficient to achieve acceptable consequences from the residual risk. So everywhere we are talking about acceptable level of risk. That is the whole crux, that is the objective of any risk management. Your risk should be under acceptable levels. Organizational acceptance deference based on an understanding of potential consequences and measurable evidence that risk management resources are used in an appropriate and cost-effective manner. What is cost-effective manner? When we say that the risk management resources are used in an appropriate and cost-effective manner, when you implement any of the risk mitigation strategies or controls, right, the cost of your control should not overweigh the cost of your actual business asset. If it is going beyond the cost of the business asset, then there is no use of implementing that control or mitigating that risk. So the cost of the mitigation should always be lower than the cost of the business asset. Okay, risk management strategy. What is risk management strategy? It's a plan to achieve the risk management objectives. What is a risk management objective? Obviously, we are again talking about the acceptable level of risk. The objective of risk management is to identify the risk, bring the risk level down to the acceptable. That is the overall risk management objective, right? The acceptable level of risk is a management decision generally based on a variety of factors, including the ability of the organization to absorb loss, right? What is your organization's risk appetite? Cost of achieving acceptable risk levels and risk benefit ratios, that your cost benefit analysis is also covered under risk benefit ratios. Risk communication, risk awareness, and consulting. We have discussed in a lot of slides. We have discussed about the awareness, about the communication yesterday. So what does this mean? The risk management to become part of your organization culture, right? In most of the organization, I have seen employees are least bothered about risk because they are most focused on their operations, right? They are least bothered about what is going around from the risk perspective, what is information security. They feel a lot of burden on their head if the information security organization goes to them and asks them to do something from the security perspective, right? So that is the culture that has to change in every organization. For risk management to become part of the organization culture, it is necessary to communicate and create awareness of the issues across the organization and each step of the risk management process. Now, how you create awareness? You can create awareness through your trainings, awareness sessions, through regular mails that are sent to the management, to the employees, right? And to all the people or stakeholders that should be part of your risk management. Communication should involve all stakeholders and focus on consultation and development of a common understanding of the objectives and requirements of the program. So communication is very important. If you don't communicate with management, when management will never come to know what is the risk, right? We are the facilitator, we are the advisors. We means information security manager. Information security manager is an advisor. He will never own the business. He has to communicate the same to the management, right? Then only management will come to know what is going around in the organization from security perspective. Awareness is a powerful tool in creating the culture. You aware, you uh, you have scheduled a lot of awareness sessions, right? Awareness everywhere. Awareness is very important. If awareness is not there in the organization, it will never create the culture where people can show some due diligence towards the security risks. Shaping ethics, influencing the behavior of the members of an organization, right? I have seen people piggybacking inside the facilities, even though they already have their access cards. It's all because of awareness. It's all because of some careless things that people can do, and that can harm the organization in a lot of ways. The risk and security awareness program should include communication of risk and security information, periodic testing as a metric for awareness, and a channel for staff to report risk and security issues. What is periodic testing as a metric for awareness? For example, I will give you one example that normally all the organization face. They will send some fake emails to check whether people in your organization or the employees are aware what are spam emails or not. If they are reporting that spam emails back to information security, it means they are aware about the spam emails or the phishing exercises, right? If they are directly going to it, downloading the attachment or clicking on the link, that means they have less awareness or low level of awareness towards the security program, right? Risk awareness acknowledges that risk is an integral part of the business. This does not imply that all risk is to be avoided or eliminated, but rather that risk is well understood and known. So it is not it is not mandatory or important to eliminate all the risk. You cannot eliminate the risk, right? First thing, you can bring it down to the acceptable level, but it can never be avoided or it can never be eliminated at any cost. Information risk issues are identifiable. Employees recognize that organizational risk can affect them personally. How it can affect them personally? Obviously, if there is any security breach, the employee and it is due to some of the employees who were not aware or they didn't show due diligence towards securing the information, confidential information, then obviously they will be questioned. I have seen a lot of people, lot of employees who are being terminated because of the security breaches. Developing a risk management program. 1 minute, guys. Okay, developing a risk management program. Initial steps in developing a risk management program. These are very important steps, and this is the standard for developing any risk management program. So you should be aware about what are the steps, what they does, what is the purpose of these steps. You should know context and purpose of the program. What is the context? Why you are developing the program? Right? We are developing the program to bring down the risk to acceptable level. What is the scope and charter? Where you will define for every risk assessment, there would be a separate scope and charter, right? For example, you are performing a risk assessment for a data center. The scope will be the data center. What all things you will do or conduct during the risk assessment. That everything will come under your charter, right? Define authority, structure, reporting relationships, roles and responsibilities, right? Who would be doing what? Who all will be involved in your risk management program? Everything needs to be documented when you are developing a risk management program. Ensure asset identification, classification, and ownership. This is done when you are doing the risk assessment, right? Asset identification, for example, we have taken the example of the data center. You should have the complete inventory of this. That is a quantitative approach of doing the risk assessment, right? All the assets should be classified. Every asset should have the ownership. Determine risk management objectives. What you want to achieve from the risk assessment or risk management, right? Determine methodologies. There are a lot of methodologies that you can use, right? Or you can tailor down any of the approaches. For example, ISO 27005, that is dedicated to your information risk management, right? And ISO 31000 is one of the standards that you can use for risk management as a whole. It can be used for enterprise risk management as well. NIST 830 is one of the methodologies that you can use for risk assessment. There are a lot of methodologies. Whichever methodology it fits for your organization, you can adopt it. And designate program development team. What is program development team? Who will help in developing a risk management program, right? All the people who would be involved in developing the program would be part of the program development team. It can be your project managers, it can be senior management, it can be your information security people, it can be your business owners, right? Anyone who would contribute in developing the program. Roles and responsibilities. We discussed about roles and responsibilities yesterday also, and we are talking about roles and responsibilities today also, right? So it is not there is nothing duplicate that we have done yesterday and we are doing it today. Yesterday we were talking about roles and responsibilities from information security governance perspective. Today we are talking about roles and responsibility from risk management perspective, right? Regarding risk management, the information security manager is typically responsible for developing, collaborating, and managing the information risk management program to achieve an acceptable level of risk by meeting the control objective. So everywhere we are talking about acceptable level of risk. That is the main objective of risk management, right? Must take responsibility for working with other risk management teams and assurance activities in the organization to promote the integration of activities. We talked about convergence yesterday. We talked about how we can integrate other teams within our information security function, because when we are doing the risk assessment, or it is not limited to your one area, or as I have given the example of data center, that was just an example. It can be for your whole organization as well from security perspective. Okay, so these are some of the just basic concepts of information security. What information security manager, what should he do, right? He should have the broad understanding of a number of concepts, right? He should have high level knowledge of everything. It's not necessary that information security manager should have a deep dive knowledge, technical knowledge on each and everything regarding your operational control, technical control, strategic. No, anyone cannot provide his 100%, or they cannot have 100% knowledge of each and everything, right? But you should be aware about the concepts, what technologies are there in your organization, right? What all processes are there in your organization. You should be aware about it. If you are not aware, obviously you won't be able to do the risk assessment properly. There are a number of concepts that a risk manager, information security manager should be familiar with, like BIA, what is business impact analysis, what are controls, what are countermeasures, how they are implemented, who are the business control owners, right? How they are doing the self-assessment, how the internal audit is happening, how the external audit is happening, who all are your vendors, suppliers, how the vendor security is taken place. So information security manager should have information on each and every aspect of information security. Hope I'm not going fast. There are also a variety of information security technologies and technical concepts that are important for the security manager to understand thoroughly as they relate to risk management. That's what I was telling you earlier. Implementing risk management. Now we have understand what is risk management, what is the importance of risk management, what are the outcomes of risk management, right? What are the roles and responsibilities regarding risk management, what information security manager should do regarding risk management. Now it's time to how we will strategize and implementing the risk management. For effective implementation, integration is very important. What is integration? Integration means you should integrate all the technology processes within your organization and then focus on your risk management process, right? You cannot create a risk management process in a silo. You have to have everyone from different departments part of your program, right? When you are developing the risk management program, so they can also provide their inputs, what can be included and what cannot be included. So this is to ensure that effective information risk management is not bypassed or subverted by the lack of effective processes in other domains. That's what I was telling you earlier. It also prevents duplication of efforts and minimizes gaps in assurance functions that can adversely affect information protection activities. So how it minimizes the gap in assurance functions? There are a lot of functions in the organization, right? If we don't involve them or if we don't include them while developing the risk management program, obviously we would lack some information or inputs from their end in any of the domains, correct? So this is how the gap will increase if we are not integrating other functions within the risk management program. If we integrate it properly, it will minimize the gap. This is the risk management process. Establish scope and boundaries. As I told you, what would be the scope, what would be the boundaries of the risk management. Now, risk management can apply to the organization as a whole, to a particular process, to a particular technology, right? What is visible? Anyone is having any issues? Okay. So after you have established the scope and boundaries, you identify the information assets, you do the valuation with the help of your business asset owners. You perform the risk assessment. For risk assessment, you adopt any of the methodology. It can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, all right? Determine the risk treatment or response. Once the risk assessment is done, you have done the risk analysis, calculated the risk on the basis of likelihood and impact, and you have the information on the risk ranking. You know how to prioritize the risk based on high, critical, medium, or low risk, right? You will determine the risk treatment or response plan. Now, what you will do in the risk treatment and response plan for all the unacceptable risk, I will explain you the qualitative and quantitative as well. So once you, where was I? So once you have determined the risk, right, you will mitigate the risk now. That would be part of your risk treatment or response, correct? Now in risk treatment and response, you will implement the controls that will bring down the risk to the acceptable level, except residual risk. That this is very important. you cannot eliminate any of the risk, that is for sure. So there will be always some risk that will remain at the end of the risk assessment. So that risk is called residual risk, right? So that has to be accepted by the senior management. So if your management says no, you should completely avoid or completely mitigate the risk, you can have to eliminate the risk. So the answer is no, we cannot eliminate the risk. There has to be some residual risk. Communicate about and monitor risk. Communicate about means once you have done the risk assessment, you communicate the risk assessment results to the management or to the business owners, right? And monitor the risk on the basis of its priority and from the time, because risk has a tendency of changing, right? You introduce some new technology into the environment, that might have its own risk. So every time there is some change in the environment, there is some change in the technology, or there is some change in the process, you have to do the risk assessment again. Remember, risk assessment is very important. So someone asked me about the qualitative and quantitative risk assessment. Qualitative risk assessment is done on judgmental basis, right? For example, uh, when you are doing the risk for the physical or environmental threats, right? So you cannot have the quantitative values you for those threats. It can be qualitative. How many? What would be the severity of the threat, right? It can be high, it can be medium, it can be low. So these are qualitative values. How many times the threat has occurred in the past? For example, it has occurred once in last 10 years, right? So that is quantitative value, right? So quantitative is always in terms of figures. That is quantitative. Qualitative is on judgmental basis. There is semi-quantitative also, that is half quantitative and half qualitative. So it's a hybrid approach. If there are risk assessment that are done on hybrid basis also, where you follow the both qualitative and quantitative approaches, right? So there can be some areas where you cannot do the quantitative risk assessment. So for example, sometimes it's very difficult to come up with some valuable some business value, right? So you will ask the business owner to provide the exact value. So sometimes it is very difficult to come up with the exact value. So they will provide you on the basis of the experiences, right? That is judgmental figures or judgmental results. Defining the external environment includes specifying the environment in which the organization operates, the local market, business, right? They can be your competitors also. It can be financial or political environments where your business is operating in the local market. There would be law and regulatory environment, right? So defining the external environment, why we are defining the external environment? Because it will also have impact on the organization. You have to consider the external factors as well when you are doing the risk assessment. Social and cultural conditions, right? So in India we have a different culture. In US they have different culture, right? External stakeholders. It can be third parties, it can be investors. And defining the internal environment, it can be your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, internal stakeholders, your organization structure and culture, as we have already discussed about it. Assets in terms of resources, people, system, process, goals and objectives of your business. So all these things are from the internal environment. Whenever you are doing the risk assessment for the organization from security perspective, you should consider the internal and external environment both. Determining the risk management context. We talked about in one of the slides to determine the context of the risk management. So what does this mean? Range of the organization and processes or activities to be assessed, right? So as I told you earlier, you can do the risk management on a complete organization or on the particular activities, technology, or business processes. Or you can do the full scope of the risk management activities. Right? Roles and responsibilities of various parts of organization participating in the risk management processes, as I told you earlier about the roles and responsibilities as well. And organization culture, risk averseness or aggressiveness. So I've already explained what is risk averse or risk aggressiveness. The criteria by which risk will be evaluated have to be determined and agreed upon, right? Impact, likelihood, rules. I've already provided you the information on the impact and likelihood. And this is a diagram that represents the one of the methodologies that is used for risk assessment and analysis. So there is no single best approach to the selection of a methodology. It can depend upon your organization's requirement and depends upon the information security manager, how he adopts different methodologies, or he can use the tailored approach of any of the risk assessment methodologies that are available in the industry. Context establishment, as I told you earlier, then you go to the risk identification, how you identify the risk, you you document the risk scenarios, right? What are the threats, what are the vulnerabilities? You do the risk analysis on the basis of the information that you have gathered, right? Then you do the risk evaluation, you decide whether it is an acceptable risk or unacceptable risk, and you then do the risk treatment for the risk that is unacceptable. Risk assessment has three main phases: risk identification, where, as I told you earlier, you use risk scenarios, right? What are risk scenarios? Risk scenarios is something where you define what are the existing threats, how those threats can materialize, right? What are the weaknesses or vulnerabilities in your organization? So nature of risk, right? How you will identify the risk. There can be n number of factors to identify the risk. On the basis of information, when you have identified the risk, you will do the risk analysis. You will ask the business process owners to provide the information on, and then do the risk analysis, right? In the process of combining the vulnerability information gathered during the assessment and the threat information gathered from other resources to determine risk of compromise, both in terms of frequency and potential magnitude. What is frequency? Likelihood. Risk evaluation, here you will do the risk, you calculate the risk, right? On the basis of information that you have gathered from the stakeholders or the business process owners, they will provide you the information about the threats, vulnerabilities, acceptability, impact, likelihood, and how it should go to the risk treatment. So the first step is to locate and identify information assets. How you locate and identify information assets? It is not your responsibility to locate and identify. You will do it with the help of business owners. They will provide you this information. So let's take an example. You are doing the risk assessment for the data center, right? If you don't have the inventory of assets, you cannot do the risk assessment. Who will provide the inventory of assets? Who is the owner of the data center? There would be n number of owners who, right? Or there would be one owner, one person responsible to maintain the inventory of assets. Assuming an asset is a significant value, the next step is to determine what vulnerabilities to loss or damage exist. Now, next step would be to determine what vulnerabilities and threats are, right? What are the threats? Anything can be a threat that will pose some risk to your organization, process, or businesses is a threat, right? What is a vulnerability? Vulnerability is a weakness in your process, system, any function. For example, you don't have your antivirus installed on your system. That's a vulnerability. And if it's in it there, because there is no antivirus in your system, it can pose threat. The antivirus can enter into your system through any number of means, through the internet or through the portable devices. And that is a threat. Information asset identification and valuation, we have already talked about it, how you do it, right? Categories of typical information assets that must be assigned a value and protected include but are not limited to. So this is some categories of typical information asset, but this is not an exhaustive list. Exhaustive list can be huge. Proprietary information and processes of all types, your organization's information, confidential information, your customer information, your financial records, right? Your plans, acquisition merger plans, marketing plans, trade secrets, patent related information, PII information. There can be n number of categories of the information asset that you want to protect within your organization. Now, who identifies the asset and who provides the value to the assets is the asset owners, who will identify it, provide the information to you. They will do the valuation and they will provide you the information. You cannot do it. As an information security manager, you cannot do it. You can help them doing it. You are the advisor, you are the consultant. Common challenges and asset valuation. Often companies do not have an accurate list of their information assets. Why they don't have? I have seen many companies, they don't have the asset management process in place. If you don't have the asset management and process in place, how you will how you will track the information assets? It would be very difficult to do it. And if you don't have the inventory, obviously you don't have anything in hand. Another reason is that even when assets are known, it is often difficult to place an exact value on assets such as PII, trade secrets. Sometimes it is very difficult to have the quantitative value, right? Although a high degree of accuracy is not necessary. Okay. Quantitative, qualitative, I have explained, so I will move ahead. What is aggregated and cascading risk? Aggregated risk exists when, for example, I will give one example to explain the aggregated and cascading risk. Aggregated risk is when you have some minor vulnerabilities in your organization, right? But one minor vulnerability or a lot of minor vulnerabilities can combine together to have a big impact to the business. That is called aggregated risk, right? So for, let's take an example of aggregated risk. I'm not able to recall the appropriate example. If I am able to recall, I will come back on it. Cascading risk can also manifest unacceptable impacts as a result of one failure, leading to chain reaction of failures. For example, your one control fails, your all the controls will fail, right? So for example, the main defense for your organization is your access control, right? Now if the hacker is able to come into your facilities, or he can log into your information assets, he would be able to bypass all other controls. That is the cascading risk. When one failure lead to chain reaction of failures, is a cascading risk. I have documented one example here. It happened in once in United States, right? A failure at a small power utility in the Midwest caused a cascade of failure across the power grid. It was a very small failure in one of the power utility, and because of that, the complete power grid went down. Single sign-on can be, yes, it can be an example of cascading risk. Identification of risk. How you do the risk identification? You cannot do it on your own, first thing, right? You have to have people, your internal stakeholders, your external stakeholders. Log4j can be aggregated risk, I don't know. Risk identification is the process by which the type and nature of viable threats are determined and the organization vulnerability that are subject to those threats are examined. So as I told you earlier regarding the risk identification, how you do the risk identification, right? You jot down all the risk scenarios. What are the risk scenarios? It's a combination of your threats and vulnerabilities, from where the risk will come, what kind of risk it will be, how it can impact the business. That everything will cover under the risk scenario. Risk identification is often accomplished through a knowledgeable group effort, developing a variety of risk scenarios and what ifs. Right? In general, a risk can be related to its origin, its consequences, protective mechanism, time and place of occurrence where it is happening. A risk can be anything. It can be your logical, it can be your physical security, physical risk, your natural disasters, right? Like tornadoes, like floods, hurricanes, anything can be a risk. In selecting a risk identification methodology, the following techniques should be considered. Team-based brainstorming. As I told you earlier, you alone cannot do who performs the cost benefit analysis in the organization. It can be a combination of people. First, the cost benefit analysis, if you are doing for some security, from security viewpoint, it will be information security manager who will do the cost benefit analysis. If it is from the operation viewpoint, it will be business owner who will do the cost benefit analysis. So as I told you earlier, it is not a one-man thing to do the risk identification or the on its own, right? It's not something that can be done on a silo. Team-based brainstorming, structured techniques such as flow charting, system design reviews, what-if scenarios, threat identified internally and externally. These are some of the risk identification methodologies that you as an information security manager can follow, right, to identify the risk. Risk scenarios, I told you what are risk scenarios. These are the approaches, risk scenario approaches. One is the top down and one is the bottom up approach. Top down approach goes through identifying the business objectives and then identifying the scenarios with the highest impact on achievement of the business objective, right? But the bottom approach is first they will identify the generic risk scenarios. Generic risk scenarios are not business specific, right? It can be anything. It can be natural disasters, right? It's a generic risk scenario. What are threats? As I told you earlier, threat is anything that will cause impact, that will cause a risk, right? That is a threat. Threat to information resources and the likelihood that they will exploit an external existing vulnerability must be assessed. How you assess it? On the basis of information you gather from the stakeholders. So these are some of the categories of threats: physical, natural events, loss of essential services, disturbance, right? Pandemic, that is something new now. All the organizations are paying more attention to. Emerging threats. Indications of emerging threats may include unusual activity on the system, right? It can be key KRIs are normally used to identify the emerging threats, right? Lack of effective monitoring when combined with a threat can lead to a breach. So if your monitoring is very important. Vulnerabilities, I told you what is a vulnerability. It's a weakness in the system, right? That can, if it is materialized, then it can cause harm to your organization's business. These are some of the examples of vulnerabilities. It can be network vulnerabilities, physical access, applications and web facing services, utilities, supply chain processes. There can be vulnerabilities in anything. It can be your technical, it can be in your processes, it can be in technology, right? Some of the examples I have jotted down here: defective software, improper configured hardware, poor network design, uncontrolled or defective processes, insufficient staff, poor choice of passwords. All these are examples of vulnerabilities. Risk, likelihood, and impact. So once you have threats, once you have vulnerabilities, then you will do the risk analysis by having the likelihood and impact information, right? So for example, threat is that a flood can come every year. So that is one of the threat, right? What is the vulnerability? Vulnerability is we don't have a backup option. We don't have a business continuity plan if there is a flood in our area or in our facilities, right? So that is the vulnerability. What is the likelihood? How many times it has happened in the past? So likelihood information is always based on the historic events, right? Who will provide you this information? You can get this information from the meteorological department. You can get this information from inside the people who have already faced or seen these type of events or incidents in the past, right? Now when you have this information for this threat and vulnerability, you have identified the likelihood. For example, it happens once in 5 years, right? What would be the impact? The impact would be severe if you don't have a plan in place, right? If you have a plan or business continuity plan in place, the impact may be reduced. So for example, you have taken the example, you asked your business owners to provide the impact information. They said the impact will be high. Okay, what we can do? So impact is high, likelihood is once in 5 years, and impact is high, so normally the risk will be high. Right now, we know that the risk is unacceptable. Now what we can do? Let's move to the risk treatment plan, right? Now, in order to reduce the impact, we know what is the likelihood. We cannot change the likelihood, but we can change the impact, right? By having compensating controls in place, by having a risk mitigation strategy in place, right? Okay, let's move ahead. Risk register, I told you yesterday also we discussed about a little bit of risk register. So once you have completed the risk assessment, now it's time to prepare the risk register. Risk register will have all the entries of all the risks that you have identified in the risk assessment. Right now, this risk register is shared with your management. They normally look to the information, right? It helps management or business owners to take the decisions regarding the business, right? So during the process of identifying the risk and its components, a risk register should be established. The register should serve as a central repository for all the information security risks, including specific threats, vulnerabilities, exposures, and assets effective, as I told you earlier as well. Analysis of risk. We have already taken the example of analysis of the risk and how to do the risk analysis. So I will switch ahead. So this we have already covered. Information used to estimate the impact and likelihood, past experiences of data and records, as I told you, reliable practices, market research or on other organizations and analysis, experiments and prototypes, specialists and experts advice that can provide you the information on impact and likelihood. Risk analysis techniques include interviews with experts in the area of interest and questionnaires, right? Now, when you are doing the risk analysis, obviously you cannot do everything on your own. You don't have that much of information, right? You will gather the information from other people, from business owners, from experts, from management. Use of existing models in simulation, statistical and other analysis. There are a lot of risk analysis tools that you can use. What I have used in my experience is interviews with experts in the area of interest and questionnaires, right? And that is one of the very common risk analysis technique. Quantitative, qualitative, we have discussed. I will move ahead. Evaluation of the risk. Now, what is evaluation of risk? During the risk evaluation phase, decisions have to be made concerning risk treatment and the treatment priorities based on the foregoing analysis. Now we have done the risk analysis, right? We have the results now. Now we have to decide what the management has to do. They have to decide whether they will live with the risk or they will mitigate the risk, right? If the risk meets the acceptable risk criteria, the treatment option is likely to be acceptance. We don't have to bother anything about the acceptable risk. The main area is where the risk is unacceptable. If the risk exceeds the acceptable level and is not within the tolerate variance, then treatment will most likely be some form of mitigation, right? The decisions made are usually based on the level of risk, but may also be related to thresholds specified in terms of consequences, impact. What is the business impact? What is the likelihood of the events? What is the aggregated impact of the series of events that could occur simultaneously? Right? Like, let's take an example of the pandemic, right? What happened? What happened when it started? And started suddenly. Right? Many organizations were not prepared about this pandemic. They never had a business continuity plan at this level, at least, right? Because it was never predicted that such kind of events or incidents can happen in life. Cascading risk, dominoes effect is closely coupled system, cost of treatment, ability of the organization to absorb losses, that is your risk appetite. Risk ranking, we discussed about risk ranking also. What is risk ranking? To give some kind of level, severity level to the risk is a risk ranking. My risk is high, my risk is medium, my risk is low, right? That is risk ranking. Risk ownership and accountability. Who is the risk owner? I am not the risk owner. I, as an information security manager, is not the risk owner, right? I am not accountable for any risk. It's the business who is the risk owner. It's the business who is accountable for their risk. I am not accountable. I have done my job. I did the risk assessment. I highlighted the risk. My work is done. I will help you as a consultant. I will help you mitigate those risks, but you have to spend your money. I am not going to spend my money, right? Risk requires ownership and accountability. The risk owner is accountable for accepting risk based on organization risk appetite and should be someone with the budget authority mandate to select the appropriate risk response based on analysis, guidance provided by information security manager. So this is what I told you earlier. Risk treatment options. What are the risk treatment options? Risk treatment options are your avoiding the risk, transferring the risk, mitigating the risk, or accepting the risk. What is avoiding the risk? Avoiding the risk means if you are doing any activity that involves risk, let's avoid that activity. Let's not do it. That is avoiding the risk, right? So for example, we are using some 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 utility that is free of cost, or that is open source code that is available in the market. You can just download it from the internet and you can use it, right? When, as an information security manager, when I started doing the risk assessment, I highlighted the risk to the management. See, this is the risk, and we don't know what is the code about. This is a freeware software that is available on the internet. Now we can take the call, okay, let's avoid this activity. We will not use the freeware software because it has some risk. So that is avoiding the risk by terminating the activity that gives rise to it. Transfer the risk to another party. For example, you take the insurance, right? You are transferring the risk to another party. Mitigating the risk with appropriate control measure or mechanism means you know what is the risk, you have the mitigation plan of the risk, you apply some of the controls to bring the risk level to the acceptable level, right? That is mitigating the risk. And accepting the risk means live with the risk. Okay, I know if there is a risk and I'm okay to accept it. I'm okay to live with the risk. Residual risk, I told you what is residual risk. Impact we have covered. Controls, we know what are controls. We have been talking about since yesterday on the controls. So you might be knowing about what are administrative controls, technical controls, right? What are administrative controls? Your policies, procedures, standards, written strategies, programs that are administrative controls. Technical controls, the technical controls are your operational controls, access control, patching, change management, incident management, right? These are technical controls. And physical security controls, you know what are physical security controls. Legal and regulatory requirements, we are talking about legal and regulatory requirements since yesterday. Uh, how the legal and regulatory requirements are mandatory, and that should be considered in terms of risk and impact. Right, like we took the example of GDPR, right? How GDPR is important. If you don't comply with GDPR requirement, there is a huge penalty that the organization has to pay if the organization is not non-compliant with GDPR. So it is necessary for senior management to determine the appropriate level of compliance and priority. Right? Regulation must first be evaluated to determine to what extent the organization is subject to the regulation and is already compliant. You will see a lot of questions regarding the legal and regulatory requirements. So pay more attention to the area when you are going through the CISM review manual. Cost and benefits, we have discussed what are cost and benefits, how the cost benefit analysis is done, who does it. It can be done by the information security manager when we are talking about security initiatives, right? When developing the business case, the cost benefit analysis is done. The same is presented to the senior management. Senior management can take the decision on the basis of cost benefit analysis. Information asset classification. What is information asset classification? We have been talking about asset classification since yesterday in the session, right? So every asset has to be classified, and who classifies the asset? It's the information asset owner who classifies the asset, right? If you don't have the classification process in place, you won't be able to classify the assets, and and you cannot apply the same number of controls to every asset, right? There would be asset that carries very confidential information or high confidential information. There would be assets that carry public information, so you cannot apply the same number of controls on the asset that has highly confidential information on the information asset that has a public information. So these are some of the methods that you can use for determine the criticality of the assets, impact of adverse events. You can use the BIA, business impact analysis, as the tool. There's some of the BIAs are based on Octave, Corbett, NIST. These are some of the frameworks for risk assessment that you can use. ISACA will never ask you on what is Octave, how you need to implement it. Only you just need to have high level of information that it's an information security risk management methodology that you can use it. Impact assessment and analysis. Here we are talking about business impact analysis. It is performed to determine the impact of losing the availability of any resource to an organization, right? So when you have done the business impact analysis, you will be having the list of all the critical business processes that needs attention, right? So business impact analysis is also a very important tool when you are doing the risk assessment. Impact assessment and analysis, we have discussed. RTO and its relation to business continuity. What is RTO? Recovery time objective. It's total, the recovery time objective is the time that it needs to, that should be taken in order to resume the business activities, right? So RTOs and RPOs are always provided by your business owners. They will provide what is the RTO and what is the RPO. In general, the cost of recovery is always less if the RTO for a given resource is longer, right? here is the, here I have tried to show this, what is, what are the recovery point objectives, right? It is determined on the acceptable data of loss. So here it shows how far the backup. Now this is the red, it shows the disaster strikes. The green recovery point shows, right? This is RPO. So the last backup was taken when, at the time here, right? Here. So if the disaster strikes here, this data will be lost. So this is the recovery point. How longer to recover, right? So this is the recovery time. So right, for example, 1 hour, 2 hours. These RTOs and RPOs are always decided by the business. What is service delivery objective? It is defined as a minimal level of service that must be restored after an event, right? So it is also dependent, or it also depends upon the criticality of the business function, right? So that is a minimal level of service that must be restored. For example, we have a pandemic. Okay, we have spoken to a lot of customers, and customers said, okay, if you can provide the services from home, we are okay with it, right? You don't have to be in office. That's a minimal level of service that is required at the time of any incident. What is maximum tolerable outage? MTO refers to the maximum time an organization can operate in recovery mode, right? Recovery mode comes from your uh, DR, disaster recovery plans, right? What is the allowable interruption window? AIW is the amount of time the normal operations can be down before the organization faces major financial difficulties. So for example, allowable interruption window is 1 hour. So it means that is okay for the business, but right after 1 hour, the organization will start facing some financial losses. So the business has to be up within 1 hour. So that will be your allowable interruption window. All these values are provided to you by the business owners. Outsourcing challenges. We have discussed about outsourcing yesterday also. So these are some of the clauses that has to be part of your third party contract or the master service agreement, right to source code if they are involved in developing some application, requirement that vendor remain timely with compliance, right to audit, right to review the vendor processes, SOPs, right to assess the skill set of the vendor resources. These are some of the clauses that has to be there in the third party contracts. Here it talks about risk management for IT system development lifecycle. So this is actually a huge topic, but in CISM it is very less, right? So there is nothing much that has been provided regarding how you do the risk management in the IT system lifecycle. But it says that for effective risk management, it should be fully integrated into the SDLC. Now, what is SDLC? System development lifecycle, which is normally used for your application development, right? So security should always be part of your SDLC in order to ensure that there are no vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the processes or the application that have been developed within your organization, or when you are acquiring something from outside. Security control baselines. What are security control baselines? Security control baselines are the minimum set of controls that has to be implemented within the organization, right? To establish control baseline, security manager may refer to many of the published standards that may be implemented within the organization. For example, ISO 27001. Now you have done the risk assessment, right? You have created the management program. You have done the risk assessment. You have the risk register in place. You have already provided the same to the management. Management is also aware about the risk. Now you have to do the risk monitoring. Who will do the risk monitoring? Information security manager can help in risk monitoring, right? There can be a lot of things that to do the monitoring of the risk. Whatever the risk is there, it has to be monitored whatever controls you have implemented, it has to be monitored from time to time. You cannot implement the controls and forget. Reporting significant changes in risk. As changes occur in an organization, the risk assessment must be updated to ensure its continued accuracy. So I have given you one example how the risk can be changed in the organization. For example, you are introducing a new application in your environment, right? Or you are outsourcing some of the business processes to the third party, right? It can be a risk because you are outsourcing something, you are sharing some information, confidential information will go outside, so it will introduce some new risk in the organization. Training and awareness, we have spoken a lot of things about training and awareness, how it is important. Everyone should know what is the risk, how everyone can mitigate the risk, right? Human resources are the weakest link, right? They should be provided training and awareness on the information security policies, procedures, risk, organization level risk, and how they can avoid those risks by showing some due diligence. Documentation is very important, right? Without documentation, you cannot show some evidence that has been done. Appropriate documentation that is readily available regarding risk management policies, standards, as well as other risk method is required to effectively manage risk. If you don't have risk management policy, you don't know what you are doing. There is no consistency, right? Specifically, at each stage of the risk management process, documentation should include your objectives, your audience. Audience means who was available at the time of risk management process, information resources from where you have gathered the information, assumptions if you have made any, what decisions you have taken during the risk management process. Your documented risk management policy, it should always have an owner, and it should be properly documented. It should be properly reviewed from time to time, at least once a year or whenever there is some major change in the policies. Documented and updated risk register, that is very important for the management to have risk register in place that will help management to take decisions from time to time.